Okay, great. Okay, orientation terms. Recall that when we orient ourselves to the body, when we look at structures that are any particular in the body, we always look at them from the front, anatomical position, so that our palms are facing forward, right? So this is the anatomical position. And from this position, this is superior, this is inferior. If you can, hit your mute button and then like start along with me. And so this would be superior, and this would be inferior, lateral, and then medial, and then lateral, medial, and lateral, medial, and lateral. All right, so medial and then lateral, anterior and then posterior, right? So anterior and posterior, yeah. And I wanted to point out one thing that's kind of interesting is that with some structures, there are anterior aspects that we may not think of as anterior, and one of those is the shoulder blade. So we have the shoulder blade, and the part that you can actually touch, that's the posterior surface, so called the dorsal surface of the shoulder blade. And on the underside, if you were to go through the chest and touch the front side of the scapula, that's the anterior portion of the scapula, which is where the subscapularis resides. So this is useful because we can use those orientation terms when describing where muscles are. For example, the subscapularis is on the anterior portion of the scapula. The infraspinatus is on the posterior portion of the scapula. The supraspinatus would be on the posterior and superior aspect of the scapula. Another place that you might consider in anterior and posterior are the joints, particularly the joints of the shoulder and then the joints of the hip. What's the joint of the hip called, by the way? Starts with the letter A. That's acetabulum. Acetabulum. Yeah. Okay. Acetabulum, yeah. And that is the femoroacetabular joint. That's the ball in the socket there, right? This is the deepest ball in the socket. This is the more shallow ball in the socket. So the acetabular joint, you can think of the acetabular joint as having a front surface, and that's where the femur, the ball of the femur, comes up and inserts on the anterior surface of the acetabulum. Likewise, the joint, the socket of the shoulder, that also has a name. What's that called? Starts with the letter G. It's called the glenoid. Yeah, exactly, the glenoid. So it's the glenohumeral and the femoroacetabular. So also there's an anterior portion to the glenoid, right? While we're on the subject of those areas, let's just remind ourselves that there's 3 projections coming off the scapula. One is the glenoid fossa, the other is the acromion, and the last is the coracoid process. Okay, so we did anterior, posterior. Also recall that one of the substitute terms for anterior is ventral. One of the substitute terms for posterior is dorsal. We also have anterior and posterior surfaces for the hands, although there's a term for the palm, which starts with the letter V. It's specific to the palm. What is that term?
Palmar?
Palmar, yes. Palmar starts with the P. Which one starts with a V, which is unique to the palm? So
with the P or V? I keep hearing a V.
With the V like Victor.
Oh, okay.
That.
Volar.
Volar. Oh,
Everybody say volar. Volar, that's right. And they may throw that out at you. They may be like on the volar aspect of the hand, or whatever. And it can be a little bit confusing. Yeah, so volar, dorsal, right? Or palmar, dorsal, or anterior, dorsal. This is anterior because this is the anatomical position.